Okay, so this is a look at Chapter 16, Urban Ecosystems. Urban ecosystems have to deal with cities and the ecosystem that surrounds city life, so this will be an interesting chapter. We'll look at Portland, Oregon first. It's nestled in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. It's the largest city in the state. Carefulized planning have been in play in this city since the 1970s. And today, more than 20% of people bike or take public transit, and they have a 70% recycling rate. And unlike LA, this really reduces their congestion and also air pollution. So here's a look at Portland. It's located on the corner of two rivers that come together. The city has the highest bike to work rate in the country at 7.2%, thanks to all the bike-friendly infrastructure and ability to carry bikes on public transportation. And more than 350 eco-roofs support plant life as part of the city's strategy to capture stormwater and reduce flooding. Note the green infrastructure on the streets and in the plaza below. So this is all about Portland. It's kind of a model city for how to live in a city, but also sustain the environment. The City of Portland published a summary of its progress in 2015, along with its new climate action plan. And this is just showing their progress since 1990, looking at how they recycle, how they take public transit, how they reduce electricity. So it's really kind of, like I said before, a model city for other cities to hopefully follow. If we look at early urbanization, early permanent human settlements located near supplies of food and resources, so places around food or water became cities, and also trade and industry. And urbanization is specifically the concentration of human population in densely populated cities. So that's the definition of urbanization, and that's your first blank under 16.1. It depended on various factors: how the food supply grew, what the economy was like. Water and waste management was key to the urbanization of places, and also what the government and social structure was like. Ancient cities, the earliest simple cities, were nearly 15,000 years ago. They supported high population density. There was a division of labor, so who was in charge and who was a servant or a slave. And these became centers for trade in the ancient world. And the earliest true cities just popped up about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. And these, we can tell examples, they supported society and also a government. Modern cities, in 1750, the Industrial Revolution increased the rate of urbanization as more and more people migrated into cities. Because of the Industrial Revolution, think of all these new inventions that were coming up, the steam engine. We could now start to use electricity. Urbanization greatly increased because of this. Only a small amount of people actually produced food, kind of like what it is today, because a lot of other people were working in industry. The current trends of urbanization is still currently increasing at a rapid rate. 51% of people live in urban areas. 75% are higher in developed nations. Urban poor is becoming a major issue. Think homeless. And a mega city is any city with more than 10 million residents. So there's one note in your notes under current trends, the first blank, under number 1, in 1950, 29% of the world population lived in urban areas. And today, about 54% are urbanites, with a projected increase to 70% by 2050. And then under number 3, that blank should be megacities, urban areas with more than 10 million inhabitants. 2,000 years ago, a complex system of canals and aqueducts carried water from a distance of more than 50 kilometers, which is about 30 miles, to supply the millions of people living in Rome. So even in ancient Rome, they had a system of getting water to the people. This is a look at growth in urban populations over time by income. The proportion of the population living in cities is rising in all countries, but especially in middle-income countries, as you can see there. This is a look at Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. It has more than 2 million residents, many of whom suffer from infectious diseases because they lack sanitary facilities and have no access to clean water. And as we learned about, without access to clean water, developing countries really suffer, especially in cities where there's a high population. Here's a look at some examples of mega cities. Again, these are metropolitan areas with over 10 million people. They're widely distributed, they're growing in number. As you can see, we make the list. Los Angeles, Mexico City is a big one. Sao Paulo in Brazil. Let's see where else. Tokyo. A lot of them are on the in Asia. So it's just interesting to note where the mega cities are. Shanghai. An urban ecosystem, we're under your blank under 16.2, is a region of Earth that supports the commerce, industry, and community interactions of a large number and a high density of humans. So this is another type of ecosystem that lives in cities. It also includes the physical environment, the organisms living in and around it, and also the biodiversity of all the systems. We define an urban ecosystem, or the U.S. Census Bureau does, as an urban area if its average population density is at least 500 people per square mile. And a metropolitan area is a large central city and all the adjacent communities. So those are your next couple blanks at the bottom of your first page of notes. We talk about material flow, meaning cities require a large input of all material resources to build the infrastructure, to provide food and other products for the people living there. But this also produces high amounts of waste, and that's what we'll go over in the next chapter. Chapter 17 will all be about waste. Hopefully this city might look a little familiar to some of you. As seen in this aerial photo, Los Angeles sits at the center of an extensive area of development stretching from the coast to the mountains. The metropolitan area that surrounds the city center is the 21st largest in the world and the second largest in the US. It encompasses about 4,800 square miles and it's inhabited by some 12.3 million people. That was in 2017. I think it's a little more than that now. We'll find out soon after the census is taken. Into the suburbs. So let's talk about suburbs now, but we'll focus on LA first of all. The metropolitan area of LA is tied together by over 20,000 miles of highways. Downtown LA is dominated by high-rise buildings and traffic-clogged streets. As we all know, there's few natural spaces downtown. City Hall can be seen in the upper left center photo, and if you drive 15 miles out, you'll find suburbs dominated by low stature construction and more green space. If you continue another 122 miles, you'll get to the exurb, which we'll talk about what that means, of palm deserts. So we're going to talk about suburbs and exurbs now, and these will be the next two blanks on your notes. Geographers define metro areas, cities, suburbs, and exurbs in specific ways. So a suburb is a densely populated center outside the central city, but in the metropolitan area. So that's your first blank for number 3. And then your next blank within number 3 is an exurb, which are patches of commercial and residential development interspersed in a matrix of rural land. So these are suburbs and exurbs. And the metropolitan area includes all of them. It includes the city itself and all the suburbs and exurbs. Here's a look at the urban ecosystem and all the inflows and outflows that go into the urban ecosystem. Some things that the urban ecosystem needs are energy, air, water, food, natural resources, plants and animals, and people. Some things that an urban ecosystem produces are heat. Cities are always a little bit hotter. Air with pollutants, water with pollutants, solid wastes, products. Plants and animals come out of cities, think rodents and people. Urban climate. So we'll talk about urban climate now, and we'll talk about the urban heat island effect, which is a blank under number 1 in your notes. This is the tendency for cities to be warmer than surrounding rural areas, and this is called the urban island effect. Cities are generally warmer and less humid. There's 4 characteristics that drive this effect. There's no vegetation, so usually trees cool places down. Impervious and sealed surfaces. These impervious means closed surfaces, so no water can get through to cool the earth below it. Complex 3D structure with all the buildings that can absorb a lot more heat, and sources producing heat and pollutants such as cars and other industry. All factors affect the absorption of solar energy, the rate of how much heat is lost, and air movement. So the blanks under number 2 are less vegetation and impervious surfaces, as well as large buildings and the release of gases. So this is a look at a thermal satellite image of Atlanta, Georgia. Buildings and streets appear yellow to red, indicating that they are warmer than the open lawns, parks, and ponds, which appear green to blue. Heat absorption by buildings and streets and shading by tall buildings produce complex variations in climate within city centers. Here's a look at the urban-rural temperature gradient showing in late afternoon the temperature and places looking at rural, suburban, residential, commercial, and downtown. And you can see how the urban heat island profile, downtown has the highest late afternoon temperature out of all the metro areas within the city. In New York City, the White Roof Project is coating roofs with white paint to reflect the sun rays and reducing energy costs and the heat island effect. So they're actually painting their roofs white, which helps to reduce heat. Vegetated planters along city streets in Indianapolis help to soak up rainwater, reduce flooding, and filter pollutants from runoff. So one city tries to use some sort of plants. And you'll notice in city, they do have some sort of these plants or green spaces. They're not just for aesthetics, to make it look nicer. They're to try to help lower pollution, increase groundwater percolation, and also just to lower the temperature of the city itself. Urban population distribution. So we're going to talk about suburban land use, and it is increasing as stated in your notes because of population growth and changing patterns of development. The per capita land consumption is the average amount of land used by each citizen, and it includes land occupied by homes, roadways, public buildings, factories, commercial offices, and public parks. So we're seeing that suburban land use is increasing. It changes the patterns of development, and we call it the urban sprawl as people are moving away from city centers. There's still a great population of this whole metropolitan area, but they're just moving further away from the city center. Here's a look at sprawling Las Vegas. It's a sequence of satellite photos, shows the urban development, shown in red, of Las Vegas in 1972, 1999, and 2014. And you'll notice how Las Vegas has just exploded, and it continues to explode. I think they have their own, or they're getting their own professional football team now. This is showing the urban-suburban shift. The percentage of the total U.S. population living in metro areas has grown steadily, and within these areas, growth has actually been greatest in the suburbs. So again, people are living in cities, but they're moving out into the suburbs to kind of get away from the city center. Urban decay, this refers to the what happens when people leave cities and do not occupy them. This is showing an abandoned factory in Detroit. It's emblematic of the diminished economic activity and the deterioration of buildings and infrastructure in many city centers themselves. Causes of urban sprawl, then, this will be the top of your second page of notes, include government policy, economic growth, transportation, cultural issues, and poor planning drive urban sprawl. The American dream is to own a single-family home with a nice little yard, your own driveway, plenty of space between your neighbors, The U.S. government policies contribute to the sprawl by facilitating single home ownership with a tax code that allows homeowners to deduct mortgage interest and property taxes. Urban slums refer to informal settlements. Urban slums, let's take a look at this. This will be, or a little bit further down your notes now. Under letter D, 1 in 7 people in the world live in an urban slum. There's a lack of services such as law enforcement, clean water, sanitation. There's substandard construction, which will be at greater risk from earthquakes, hurricanes, landslides. This is a look at an urban slum in Brazil. It's the largest slum in Brazil. It has an upwards of 180,000 residents. On the steep margins of Rio de Janeiro, this slum lacks basic sanitation. Sewage runs down the slope and pollutes the river below. And this water pollution was of great concern to those participating in water sports back in the 2016 Olympics. This is a look at urban organization and showing how different cities can organize their grids. San Diego, California is the first city on the left. It provides an example of an urban grid, whereas Paris, France has a radial organization coming out from a center. And then you see Barcelona, Spain combines a radial and grid formation of organization. So this takes us to urban planning, which is bounding growth. It's growth managed in cities by zoning. And zoning is the designation of specific land area uses, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial. The urban growth boundary is the regional zoning boundary, and it delineates or makes boundaries where high density development is allowed. So your first blank under number 2 in bounding growth is zoning. One of the most important tools for urban planning is zoning, and that's the designation of specific areas for different categories of land use. If we look at Savannah, Georgia, this is an example of a U.S. city that was planned around its garden and parks. You can see Forsyth Park there in the lower central area. It and over 20 smaller garden squares were built into the design of the city, and these green spaces are popular destinations today for tourists and residents. This is a look at sustainable urban growth. How do we continue to grow cities, but in a sustainable way? And a lot of these blanks will be next in your notes. These are basic strategies. We'll promote compact communities, mixed land uses, so adding in green spaces, creating a range of housing opportunities and choices, foster communities that provide a sense of place, and conserve open spaces, farmland, natural beauty, and critical environment areas. And this is a continuation of that sustainable urban growth, strengthening existing communities first, providing a variety of transportation choices, whether that's public transit, the ability to ride your bike, creating walkable neighborhoods, making development decisions predictable, fair, and cost-effective, and encouraging community collaboration. This urban development in Toronto, Canada has used architecture and land planning to create appealing urban spaces. And this is a look at Southern Village. It's near Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's developed based on new urbanism principles. So shops, churches, and other meeting places populate the town square and are an easy walking distance from the surrounding homes and apartments. So we're looking at how to create cities in a sustainable way. Open hearings such as this before the Boise, Idaho City Council provide an opportunity for public input into the developmental decisions of these cities. So this is just to say you guys all have a choice, and that involvement builds a true sense of community among its citizens. Atlanta, Georgia holds the title in the U.S. with the greatest growth in urban area from 2000 to 2010, and long ago the city burst through its original boundaries and spread in every direction. So Atlanta originally was a railroad settlement, and it had over 22 miles of railroad tracks. And as the city grew, its focus shifted to a less industrial economy, so it wasn't using those railroad tracks. So this is Ryan Gavel. He devised a plan to transform these 22 miles of railway into some sort of park and trail system, which is kind of cool to see today. So today you can see the architect down there is pointed at Ryan Gavel, and these is one of his trails that line some of the 22 miles of old railway trails in Atlanta. So here's Atlanta's proposed Beltline. It encompasses 1,300 acres of parks, 33 miles of trails, and 22 miles of public transportation. This project is still going on, and it's expected to be completed in 2030, but it's a great way to use old railroad tracks that aren't being used anymore for use again. If we look at what a green building is, buildings are significant use of resources, and the choice of the building itself can reduce an impact. So we're going to talk about what makes a green building green. The site selection, this is going through your notes. Many developers prefer to build on underdeveloped land because it offers fewer constraints, but a more sustainable approach is still to infill development that involves building on a previously developed land, but now vacant site that is located in a built-up area. Building orientation, how the building is oriented with sunlight coming in to possibly use solar energy can help to make it more green. And then choice of materials, they can embody energy, so the different choice of materials can help make a building green. Here's a look at the regional headquarters of the EPA in downtown Denver. It's housed in a 9-story high-performance green building. It features green roof planted with grasses, perennials, and ground covers, a portion of which is shown here. So this is an example of a green building in Denver. Here comes the sun. This shows how a green building's orientation can affect the amount of energy it uses. So because the sun's path comes from west to east, it can align its solar panels or windows for airflow to be more green and to use that as cooling systems or sun systems. Landscaping can also help to regulate the exposure to the sun and wind and thus support energy efficiency. So in the choice of materials, one such consideration in a building is a material's embodied energy, and that refers, it's used to evaluate the sum of the total energy used in extraction, harvesting, manufacturing, and delivery of construction materials. So this shows the material being used in building and the primary energy requirement worldwide. So you can see how different types of building materials have less energy requirement, and a building might try to use materials with lower energy. So you can see towards the bottom we have limestone, clay, brick, concrete is a little bit more lower in energy than using things like aluminum or plastic. The built environment sustaining building energy. This is a rating system for sustainable building, and some of these rating systems are in your notes as well. BREEAM, Energy Star, LEED, and Green Globe System are the 4 that are listed in your notes. Basically, they just all assess different energy uses of buildings by different people. So the BREEAM is the Building Research and Establishments Environmental Assessment Method. Energy Star was established by the EPA for building and energy efficiency. LEED was established in 1998, and the Green Globe system was established actually in Canada, and now it's also being used in America. So the scores are given for sustainable features of buildings, how well they conserve water, how they use daylight, recycling, construction waste, locally sourced materials, energy efficiency, and much more. So this is a way, when we're talking about urban ecosystems and developing cities that are sustainable, we're looking at how we can make the buildings themselves sustainable. This is leading the way. Buildings are assessed in a 5-credit category for points in the LEED certification. And you can see those 5 categories there, how well they use water, materials, indoor environmental quality, and the description of each. In 2008, the building's owner of the Empire State Building and his team set out to optimize the performance while reducing greenhouse gas of the Empire State Building. An additional goal was for this building to serve as a model that others could replicate. The team wanted to show that it was economically beneficial for building owners and tenants to pursue sustainability goals. So what they did is they tried to refurbish their windows to increase insulation. 96% of their glass was reused, and by refurbishing their windows, they reduced their energy cost about 38%, which is like a 3-year return on investment. So they do reduce their energy costs about $4.4 million, which is a huge amount of money. Here's the Empire State Building. It towers about 1,400 feet in Manhattan, and today holds the title of the tallest LEED certified building in the United States. So now we're going to look at some of the urban transportation and some of the challenges of urban transportation. Automobile dependency is huge because when we're talking about people moving away from city centers, a lot of them still work within the cities. So this sprawl of cities leads to automobiles, which in turn encourages more sprawl because people just keep driving into work, even if it's an hour one way where they can afford to buy a home. So they're looking at balancing transportation options that are very pedestrian oriented, and mass transit is always talked about, increases in busing or railway to get people back into the city without using automobiles as much. This is the transportation to work around the world, showing how cities vary in their mix of models of transportation to work. You'll see that American cities rely highly on automobiles, while many Asian cities support cycling to work. And note that this World Bank database used here relies on secondary sources, and it's incomplete for some of the cities. So it's looking at the purple is the use of cars in cities, yellow is public rail, the green is public bus, the blue is bicycle, and the red is on foot. So you can see how US cities definitely use cars, but Asian cities use a lot more foot, bicycle. Paris has a lot of public rail, trains. Here's the light rail. This is showing with an annual ridership of about 1.3 million. This is a 12.5-mile-long metro rail light system in Houston, Texas, and it's one factor accounting for diminished automobile traffic congestion in the city center. Here's the bus rapid transit. This is in Bogota, Colombia. They have their own lane and boarding station, so you'll see this in places that use a lot of busing. They're highly physically separated from the rest of the highway, and note how the traffic is backed up on the left. Bogota has set the daily driving restrictions based on the last digits of automobile license plates to help limit the congestion. Pedestrian friendly, this is a look at a mall in downtown Boulder, Colorado. It's become an attraction for many residents because they have moved automobile traffic outside the city and made the center of their city only able to get through by walking. So urban transportation economics, they look at the cost of automobile subsidized, the cost of automobile used externalized through pollution and ecosystem damage, and all congestion, which would reduce the productivity of our ecosystem as well. This is a look at congestion market. During peak traffic hours, motorists driving in London's central zone are actually charged a daily fee. Can you imagine driving in LA traffic and getting a fee? Maybe that would help some people find another way to work. There is wildlife in urban cities. We're kind of going through the rest of your notes pretty quickly here. You don't have much to answer until the last page on the back. Urban wildlife can be widely dispersed. The food webs can be really complex. Invasive trees do well and provide food for animals, and these food webs can include urban plants, landscaping, garbage, and also human-provided feeders. So we have to get a little more creative when we're talking about urban wildlife systems. Here's an urban tree. It produces a tiny wind-blown seed that can germinate and thrive in a variety of urban habitats. Rodents and pigeons provide abundant food for urban peregrine falcons, such as this one. And you can see in a study of 15 London gardens, the diversity of insects was found to increase with distance from the city center. So that just shows the further away from the city center you get, the more diverse species you'll get, which makes sense. Many communities in arid or desert climates are encouraging homeowners to replace water-demanding lawns with drought-adapted landscaping. So replacing your grass with rocks, succulents, it's a standard practice in this residential southern Arizona community. Green infrastructure. So this green infrastructure looks at trees, gardens, and green roofs and how they can provide a great many services in urban ecosystems. They can improve a city through water management, air quality, aesthetics, just make it look nicer, support wildlife, and also reduce heat. Trees such as these along Barcelona's famous La Rambla beautify cities, but they also provide shade and diminish the urban heat island effect. Here is air pollution and how urban trees can affect that. Ozone pollution has damaged the green needles of this urban white pine, and you can see how the tips of it can turn brown. Here's Battery Park City's Liberty Garden in New York City. It's planted right next to West Street, an 8-lane highway, and it's used by over 60 gardeners. So they've put a community resource, a garden, in the center of the city. Here's a look at Central Park, New York. It was designed by a man named Frederick Law Olmsted, and he designed it for New York City's signature park, and it set a standard for the development of city parks around the world. Remember, we learned how it's not necessarily ideal because there's no connecting this park to other ecosystems, so you don't get the biodiversity needed, but it does set the standard for creating a huge green, beautiful space in the center of a city. Here's a look at San Antonio, Texas, and kind of the Riverwalk right next to the San Antonio River. And it's now lined with shops and restaurants, and the flow of the river is maintained in this dry city using treated municipal wastewater. So things to help beautify the city. As we focus on signs, we're just going to look at someone who tried to focus on creating green walls and to help with bird abundance. And this woman found that birds are more associated with vegetated walls in the winter. So this woman, Caroline, sampled the insect population on one of her green walls, which was part of one of her studies. So she tried to create these walls with vegetation to help with the biodiversity of birds. And she found that with a green wall, the mean bird abundance also increased. So then this brings us to the last part of your notes, the city as a sustainability strategy. Efficient capture and use of energy and matter are important in sustaining cities. City metabolism should be circular, not linear, and we'll talk about what that means. We need to provide diversity, which enhances the ecosystem services. It provides economic and social benefits. Self-regulation and adaptation has to do with the capacity for these cities to be able to self-regulate and adapt. In urban ecosystems, responses to these changes are primarily determined by human interactions. We need to make cities resilient, and also we need to beautify our cities. We are drawn to nature by its beauty, and indeed that beauty is often a central motive for creating a creative preservation of natural places within cities. This is a look at circular versus linear metabolism. Compared to natural ecosystems, the flow of materials and energy in urban ecosystems is more linear. So in a natural ecosystem shown in letter A, whatever gets inputted into it will come out of it and reused. And they're working on trying to create that circular ecosystem within cities because, as you know from letter B, as we input food, energy, and goods into a city, we just get this linear metabolism graph. The outputs are all wastes, emissions, and organic wastes. We talk about circularizing a city's metabolism. All waste is collected in special bins in letter A and subsequently sorted in letter B to maximize recycling. Along streets, stormwater is diverted through gardens to moderate flows and remove pollutants in C, and then power buses in D. And all these practices mimic ecosystem functions to benefit the city and efficiently convert energy to power the ecosystem in a more circular way. That's the end of this chapter. Chapter 17, our next one, we'll talk about waste management, which will also be interesting. Hope you guys are all doing well. Take care.